It is a privilege for me to be here, and I want to thank the organizers, Bernice and her husband, for putting this wonderful program for everyone here. The title of my talk is The Silent Demise of the Christian World. I gave a similar talk in the Vatican about a month ago, and I presented this paper to His Holiness, Pope Francis. As you will see from my presentation, I think the world is in crisis. It is with great concern and deep distress that I feel compelled to address you regarding the crisis confronting the Catholic Church and the family in the Western world, including North America, and now expanding worldwide. The words of St. John Paul the Great in 1989 are very significant. He told me, there is a greater danger coming to the world than communism. But he also said, be not afraid. A marvelous expression of faith as we confront a world on the brink of disaster. As members of the pro-life movement that we all are, we must concede that the fact that never in the history of the world have powerful special interest groups in association with its own governments financed their own extinction with the people's taxes and with mild and weak opposition from us, Roman Catholics. The demographic suicide of the West is no longer only Europe and Japan. It includes North America and expanding to the developing world. It is for this reason that destruction of life in the womb continues, and premeditated destruction of life of the elderly and handicapped before their natural end is extending to more of what no longer deserves to be called civilized societies. When nations no longer have sufficient young people working to maintain the elderly population who retires, laws are passed to eliminate them. The tragic events that have led to this catastrophe needs to be addressed in order to understand why the Western world is committing suicide. We respectfully request that close attention be given to the graphs of this presentation that clearly demonstrates the intensity of the silent occupation of the Christian faith, which is overtaking Europe and now expanding its conquest to the Americas. As more of our churches and schools are closing because of lack of parishioners and children, others are building mosques all over the countries of Europe and America, sometimes even purchasing our old churches for the simple reason that Islamic believers are having children, and Christian families are not. As influential and carefully selected leaders of the pro-life movement and servants of the successor of Peter, we must appeal to our leadership to take immediate action to save these countries by addressing the root of the impending disaster, the disappearance of the Christian faith. The majority of Catholics are or have used artificial, mostly abortifacient, methods of birth control, placidly ignoring the rules of the Church and oblivious of the harm to their bodies and souls. This is the main reason parishioners are scarce and children are missing. So of course churches and schools must close. This problem has never been aggressively condemned throughout the Catholic world and mildly discussed in most pro-life conferences. We need to discern what requires our most immediate action, particularly in Europe, where there are very few practicing Catholics. If we want to defend our Holy Mother Church with our Pope, we must begin by addressing the most critical problems confronting the Catholic Church, the lack of children being born exacerbating the lack of vocations. This human desolation needs to be addressed, and I respectfully request that we pay close attention to these graphs in order to appreciate the need to take immediate action to save these countries. It is necessary to engender 2.1 children per couple to remain at zero population growth. As you can see, none of the famous G8 countries or the powerful countries like France, where they have 2 children per couple, and most of those children being born are not even French, they're Muslim. You have the United States, it's already 1.9 and continuing going down, in spite of us Hispanics coming across the Rio Grande. At least we're Christians. United Kingdom, look at it, 1.8. Canada, 1.6. Germany, 1.4. Italy, 1.4 and less really. Russia, 1.4. Japan, 1.3. Poor nations, this is the United States. This was published in the Wall Street Journal as an alarming graph, but probably very little attention was given to it. Now, poor nations, like where I come from, Guatemala, and I'm still a Guatemalan, poor nations need 2.6 children per couple to replace its populations. As you can observe, only Africa is replacing its population, but already slowly descending due to massive population control programs funded and imposed by the United States and European countries, and now the Gates Foundation. I have seen how Africa has been going down. It used to be 6, then it was 5, and now it's already 4.6. Now you're going to see something really interesting. The Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, Angela Merkel, announced September 22nd, 2010, that by the year 2050, Germany will be an Islamic nation. Nonetheless, she doesn't seem to be taking any drastic steps to reverse the disappearance of her German race. Actually, as you can see from there, Belgium is supposed to become an Islamic nation by the year 2030. But let me tell you about Germany. This is in the United States, the distribution of mosques in the United States. In Belgium, you probably did not read much about it, but in December 2013, the Belgian Senate passed 50-17 votes to approve a law allowing to kill by euthanasia children with disabilities and people with dementia. Currently, this law already passed the House of Representatives and was approved. King Philip of Belgium sanctioned the law and was enforced as of May 2014. Belgium is supposed to become an Islamic nation by the year 2030. Paul Williams reported in September of 2010 in Family Security Matters that 50% of the newborns in Belgium are Muslims. France is going in the same direction. 30% of children aged 20 years and below are Muslims. The ratio in Paris and Marseille has soared to 45%. In southern France, there are more mosques than churches. In the United Kingdom, it is not much different. In the last 30 years, the population climbed from 82,000 to 2.5 million. Now there are 1,000 mosques throughout Great Britain, many of which were converted from Christian churches. Italy and Spain and the rest of the de-Christianized Europe will follow suit. Why so many? Why, you may ask? Well, the answer is very disheartening. Former Christians are not having children, they're having dogs and cats. And the Islamic world is having children. In the United States, churches and schools are closing everywhere while thousands of mosques are opening throughout the country. We have to admit that Islamic followers are very disciplined. They follow and respect their faith, whereas we cannot express a comparable devotion within our Catholic faith at the present time. During the famous United Nations conferences in Cairo, Copenhagen, Beijing, Istanbul, and Rome, the Islamic representatives defended life from the moment of conception, fought against the legalization of abortion worldwide, strongly opposed sodomy and pornographic sex education, and cooperated with the Vatican in defending human principles. I was there, and they were the only ones that supported us. I was representing Guatemala at the time. In contrast, the representatives of the so-called Christian nations were the main instigators advocating evil practices, because these countries were not formed properly in their Christian faith. They were not taught to respect and follow the teachings of Humanae Vitae that clearly spelled out the consequences of disobeying the prophetic teachings. We are now suffering the penalties of defiance to the Holy Spirit who guided Pope Paul VI. Christian families are not having children. Therefore, since religious vocations usually come from large families, it is necessary first to convert the hearts of the families to return to the Catholic faith. Otherwise, Europe and North America will not need laws to legalize euthanasia anymore. These nations are already euthanizing themselves. G.K. Chesterton warned that contraception and homosexuality are part of the same perversion against nature. Today, those who favor widespread contraception also favor same-sex marriage. Same-sex marriage is against the natural law, and we Catholics are not defending our Christian inheritance with the vigor and strength that it deserves. John A. Harden, a Jesuit, wrote an outstanding booklet entitled Contraception, Fatal to the Faith, and fatal it has been, with insignificant opposition from our Catholic faithful. I feel mortified at having to write this report to all of you, but time is of the essence. We have to defend the faith. From the moment that Pope Paul VI wrote his encyclica Humanae Vitae, he was unjustly attacked by many Catholics. The chair of Peter was tarnished by the arrogance and disobedience from those who turn against the teachings of Christ. It is uncanny to observe that all of those religious leaders of the countries that opposed Pope Paul VI are today suffering the consequence of a deliberate annihilation. I'm talking primarily of Europe. The sources of evil that have managed to expand their culture of death are now claiming their conquest over souls, and they are not encountering much opposition in Europe and the United States. As leaders of pro-life, we should make a strong effort to investigate why are there so many divorces. The answer is evident. The primary culprit has been our mediocre defense of the teachings of the Catholic Church. Second, I will show you what I think is typical. We're fighting abortion, but we forget that why the boat is sinking is because there has been no parental formation. It's almost faulty, weak, and inferior. Sex education has been the destruction of the innocence of children. And unfortunately, as you know, Planned Parenthood has been doing the most destructive sex education in the public schools. And even the Catholic so-called sex education has been bad, because this is the duty of the parents, and the best education is the example that parents give to their children. artificial birth control, indiscriminate distribution of artificial birth control to children and young adults everywhere. So the Plan B, it was passed during President Bush. They keep lowering the age. Plan B is the destruction is abortion through the birth control pill in large doses. And we have allowed it to happen. So, even young married couples fell in the trap of population control with the obvious results of adultery, followed by increased divorce. Now I'm going to show you what many people may forget. While we are fighting abortion and have had no success since 1973, the devil is not at all concerned. He's happy that we are being distracted. And in the meantime, by destroying the innocence of children, that would really worry him. It would start stopping sex education, pornographic sex education that Planned Parenthood is imposing on most public schools. That's the real treasure of the devil, is pornographic sex education. And as you can see, the education has been going down all the way to kindergarten, teaching them about having two daddies and two mommies, that would be perfectly normal. And then you have, of course, the pornography from the internet, and you have the television programs and the movies, which are worse every day. And they distribute birth control in schools and universities. So what do you expect? What do you expect to happen? And then, of course, at universities, one of the first things they teach the students as they come to classes. And then we can abort the baby up to the 9th month. So the situation is very serious. Now I'm going to tell you about what most women have no idea of the mode of action of these methods and its abortifacient effect. The pill, the patch, the NuvaRing, the Depo-Provera injection, the implants, and the intrauterine devices are all abortifacients. How do they work? Well, there are 3 ways of action. One may be that the woman may not ovulate when she takes the pill or has any of the methods. She may not ovulate, and the messages from the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland does not produce the pituitary hormones, so the messages don't go to the ovaries to mature the egg. That could be one. But the pharmaceutical industry tells you, and they're the main culprits, they say, well, don't worry. If she ovulates, don't worry, because with these very dangerous synthetic hormones, it makes a woman produce a secretion that is so dense and thick that it will not allow the sperms to enter. But if she ovulates and she does produce the fertile type secretion that will keep the husband's sperm alive, then the pharmaceutical company says, don't worry, because we will change the lining of the uterus so that when after conception takes place and the baby takes about 5 or 6 days to come down to implant in the uterus, it finds a hostile environment for the baby to survive. So the baby is aborted. That's the mode of action of most of those methods. Now, this is what the environment of the uterus would look like, a normal environment for nourishing the baby's life in the sacred place, which is the mother's womb. This is what it turns like under the influence of those steroid hormones, like a desert, not enough food for the baby to survive, so it is aborted. So most women don't even know that they may be aborting their own child. So that's a very important factor to remember. I remember talking to priests and sometimes bishops, because many times the women come crying and saying, I didn't know, because I have not been told. I have not heard it from the pulpit. And I say that to the priests. So these women are not at fault, because you have not told them. So that sin doesn't fall on them. That sin falls on you. Of course, I become very unpopular. But it has to be told. And now you have to go and tell the priest and your bishop what they're doing. Because if you don't, remember, there's the other sins that we talk about. The ones that we do not, the sin of omission. But now you know. Now you gotta go say it. So, these methods are very potent sex steroid hormones being given to girls, women, and premenopausal women through hormone replacement therapy. Women who use any of these methods before they have had a full-term pregnancy run the risk of developing breast cancer 10 or 12 years later. Now, all that information is in my book for anybody who wants a copy of my book. I just summarize some of the most serious side effects of artificial methods. Oops. What happened? Ah, there it is. Slideshow. I gotta put, yeah, but it's here. Wouldn't that be the same? Oh, sorry. What happened? Okay. So, you have breast, liver, and cervical cancer, cardiovascular disease, pulmonary embolism, thrombophlebitis, vision problems, liver dysfunction or disease, osteoporosis, lowering of libido, serious effects on the fetus during the first trimester of pregnancy, and there's many more, but I cannot give you all of it. This is another important one. The World Health Organization reveals to the world that oral contraceptives act as carcinogens. On July 29, 2005, 21 scientists of the International Agency for Research on Cancer of the World Health Organization met in France. After an exhaustive review of the world literature, they declared that the combined drugs, estrogen and progesterone, used in the birth control pill and in the hormonal replacement therapy were carcinogenic, not only for breast cancer, but also for cervical and liver cancers. Now look at this ironic graph. Risk of breast cancer as reported in China in 2013. Okay, if you have one abortion, 44% increased risk of cancer. 2 abortions, 76%. 3 abortions, 89%. Even China is putting these warnings. Now the IUD is always an abortive agent because it doesn't stop ovulation from happening. It doesn't stop the sperms from coming in, conception from taking place, but the effects of the IUD is afterwards on the baby. It affects the endometrial lining, making it a hostile environment for the baby, and the baby is aborted. Some babies insist on being born, and it's a very dangerous pregnancy with the IUD. And there's many more that I could tell you, but there's not enough time. Sometimes the IUDs, this is the old IUD, but the copper T and the one that is mostly used now, they can perforate the uterus, and they have to go and look for them. Sometimes it ends up in the stomach or in the appendix like this one, or it's embedded in the back of the baby, or sometimes baby comes out with the IUD in the hands and gives it to the doctor. That's what the nurses tell me. So, I mean, but imagine in a developing country, they don't even have x-rays in many of the little towns in the countryside. So what happens to these women? They die. I just heard of a baby who had the IUD encrusted in his head, and when they tried to take it out, he bled to death. These are happening. And whatever you stop using here because there are too many suits, they send all the leftovers to the third world. That is happening. The famous condoms, they are another disaster. They promote it as being a panacea, and you know it is not. They look at the difference. The virus that causes AIDS is 500 times smaller than a human sperm. If it wasn't good in preventing pregnancy, which is a woman is only fertile for about 100 hours in her whole cycle, how is it going to prevent venereal diseases? So what has happened with venereal diseases? This is another big tragedy that you don't hear much about lately. The Center for Disease Control of Atlanta recently gave a report, which I don't know how many people read it in the papers, but it was a very damaging report in a way. It says, it disclosed that 110 million Americans have had a venereal disease at any given time. In a population of 315 million, 35% have contracted the diseases. This is the ongoing but hidden plague of a society transitioning from Christianity to paganism. I just wanted to tell you also about this graph. This is 2 countries. You have Thailand, who accepted everything the United States gave them insofar as birth control, and the Philippines, which is a Catholic country, and the bishop stopped it and to try to fight AIDS. So the Minister of Health of Thailand approved a program of 100% of use. The government and the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines did not. Established an organization free of AIDS in the Philippines. And you look at the population of both countries, okay? The Philippines, Thailand is 62 million, Philippines is 79 million. And then you have AIDS deaths in 2003, 58,000. In the Philippines, who did not accept all those programs, 500. Adults and children that live with HIV, 570,000 in Thailand, 9,000 in the Philippines. Infection rate to HIV, 9 million in Thailand, 113,000 in the Philippines. So, now, the approximate number of innocents murdered through induced abortion taking place each year in the world, as reported by the UN, it's about 46 million. If you multiply that by 30 years, then you have, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back one more. You have 1.3 billion. But with chemical abortifacients, approximately 247 million are killed if you just assume that the pill abortifacient effect is just 1 per year. And you multiply that by 30 years, it becomes 7 billion. So if you add the two, 7.4 billion and 1.3 billion, you have 8.7 billion that have been murdered in the last 30 years. Now, this is another important graph that I have put a summary in my book. Who is the single most important person protecting this woman from breast cancer? her baby. Long before birth, her baby's chemical signals began the process of breast growth and maturation that make breastfeeding possible. And it is only through a full-term pregnancy and lactation that a woman acquires her greatest protection against breast cancer. Now, every young girl should be aware of this instead of taking the pills when they're in high school and in college, because they're just getting a higher possibility of developing cancer. The lobular structures in the human breast before a full-term pregnancy. See, lobules, the red lobules, lobules number 1, when you're born, that's what you're born with. Lobule number 2, at puberty, and lobules number 3 after full-term pregnancy. So once you have had a baby, you see how the 1, 2, and 3, the one number 3 is the one that's going to protect the woman from cancer. So it's good for a young woman to have a baby early in life, soon after she gets married, instead of waiting forever after she finishes career and practices some years of her career, and then start thinking about having a baby in her 30s. So this is the breast lobule maturation before and after first pregnancy. The green color are the ones that are protecting the mother from cancer. So at delivery, the mother's breasts are now predominantly type 4 lobules. They are fully mature and resistant to carcinogens. There are fewer places for breast cancer to start. This results in lower long-term risk of breast cancer for the mother. This is what mothers should be teaching their daughters. Now, something very interesting has been happening, and we have not been made aware of it. And what I'm going to tell you right now is that in Russia, 2 years ago, President Putin stopped abortion. Why he did that, we still don't know. But he stopped abortion, he stopped sex education, and he has opened, like what we call crisis pregnancy centers here, all over Russia, to convince Russian women not to have an abortion. Because he realized that Russia is now 1.4 children per couple, and the country was going downhill, committing suicide. And he also has a large population of Muslims in the southern part of Russia. So he realized that either he changes or that's the end of his country. So he stopped abortion. He stopped sodomy. Well, he puts them in jail, to those who practice sodomy. And that has been extremely interesting. And now I have to remind you that Our Lady in Fatima said that Russia was going to spread a lot of errors throughout the world, which it did with communism all over the world. But eventually Russia would be converted, and there would be a time of peace. And it could be that this is what's happening in Russia. And from what I hear from people going back and forth there, it seems to me that this is what may be happening. So we hope it is. There's this bishop who is an Orthodox bishop, had just visited Pope Francis, and he told the Pope that there are changes, incredible changes taking place in Russia. They have 26,000 churches have been rebuilt or built anew, and people by the thousands are coming to be baptized again. Monasteries are being opened. So he said, we have gone from a dark ages to discovering our faith again. And he said, Russia has done it, and we're challenging other countries to come join us, which was quite interesting. Now, I'm going to tell you about the wisdom of the teachings of the Catholic Church. Alice von Hildebrand, who is a good friend of mine, told me, you should tell this to the people when you teach natural family planning. Because she said, as soon as the word create is used, God is involved, as it is impossible for human creatures to create anything. The greatness and mystery of the material embrace, of the marital embrace, elevated to the dignity of a sacrament, reveals clearly that there is a close collaboration between God and the spouses. They can contribute to the union of the male sperm with the female egg, but they cannot create the soul. The special dignity of the female body consists in the fact that God creates the soul within her body, and that therefore there is a direct contact between him and her. This dignity is denied her husband. I'm sorry. When the spouses decide to artificially prevent a conception, they choose to exclude God. In so doing, they can no longer procreate because the Creator is ousted. The awesome dignity of their union in conspectu Dei, union in the sight of God, is purposely eliminated. They then choose to copulate like animals, for animals cannot procreate. In natural family planning, God is in no way excluded. He himself chooses to close the door to a new life. Because a woman is only fertile for about 100 hours in her cycle, during her years of fertility, of course. So, the human person has two dimensions, soul and body. I don't know if you remember that Saint Hildegard of Bingen, Pope Benedict, just made her a doctor of the church. Her writings are really quite remarkable. And she wrote about the soul as directed by Almighty God. And he said, and we have to remember that. It is the soul that gives life to the body. It is the soul that is the most important part. The miracle of life at the moment of conception. It is when the invisible becomes visible. The sperm is the smallest cell in the body and the egg is the largest cell in the body. When the invisible becomes visible, there's an explosion of life where everything is determined. The color of eyes you're going to have, the height you're going to have, the health you're going to have, the color of your hair, everything is determined the moment of conception. And everything has to be normal as God created us and healthy. And the womb would be waiting to receive that new human life, to nourish and protect until the baby's born. Now I'm going to give you quickly the historical advances of natural family planning, because many people, particularly doctors, think, oh, natural family planning, yes, I know all about it, the rhythm method. No. We have accomplished a lot more since the rhythm method. There were two scientists, one in Japan, one in Austria. They both discovered that a woman ovulates around the middle of the cycle. That was pretty good. Actually, the rhythm method wasn't all that bad. It was about 85% correct and successful. But that 15% made sure to give it a bad name, and a lot of jokes came out of that. It's a rhythm baby or Vatican roulette and so on. So, but the medical books are still teaching that a woman ovulates on day 14. They have not yet modernized conveniently. And then the next discovery was, and it was usually by either a priest or a doctor, they discovered that a woman's temperature is low before she ovulates, and then it rises after she ovulates. So That was a very good method. Pius XII praised that method. It was 99% successful, but it only gave a little bit of time just after ovulation for the couples to have marital embrace. So it wasn't all that convenient. So people started making changes and calculations of rhythm, calculations according to the number of cycles they had. So then there was another discovery after that. And I was in Australia. We were living with my husband. We lived in the Middle East for 4 years, in England for 2 years when they legalized abortion. Then we were transferred to Australia for 2 years, 68 and 69, and they legalized abortion in a country that they were paying to bring immigrants from Europe. And yet they passed laws to kill their own children. It made no sense. It looks like common sense has gone out the window in the countries of the West. So much so that I used to say, they better keep us poor in our poor countries. At least we still know what's right and wrong. But anyway, when I was there, Dr. Billings and his wife and another scientist, Professor Brown, they were doing research on the old rhythm method, the temperature method, and also this Professor Brown was responsible for having discovered a way of measuring female hormones. So he knew how to measure estrogen and progesterone. The estrogen levels and the progesterone levels are always low until the woman ovulates, and then they rise to have the nourishment for the baby when it comes down to implant. And the mother's womb prepares for a baby, whether they're single or married, every cycle. So they also discovered, that was already in the literature from the 1800s, from German literature, that a woman has a secretion in the middle of the cycle. So this Professor Brown started doing the research. Okay, so Dr. Billings started asking women, do you see a secretion in the middle of the cycle? And the women say yes. And that's how the ovulation method, or the Billings method as it's called now, was discovered. And that's when I was there, when Humane Vitae came out, and all the papers were with big letters saying the Pope says no to the pill. Thank God he said no to the pill. Otherwise, right now, they would be blaming the Pope for all the cancer that women are developing and heart disease and so on. So I learned the ovulation method at that time. So I had had 2 cesareans, and I was told that I could not have any more children. So I was very diligent following what I was taught. But it was difficult. It was rhythm calculations, temperature readings, mucus observations, and I thought, oh. But when we were transferred from Australia to the United States, I had to be in Guatemala waiting for my green card, the famous green card. And I guess that's how God worked it out, because He gave me the opportunity to start teaching the poor. And I said, I cannot be teaching the poor, rhythm calculations, temperature readings. Many of them couldn't read or write. But the Billings told me that this Professor Brown said that the mucus observations was more reliable than everything else. So we developed a system of color stamps. And it was then that I brought Dr. Billings from Australia after a lot of trials and tribulations, because the USAID was imposing IUDs, pills, and all kinds of things in our country. So I went to USAID and I said, you can take all your IUDs and your pills and injections back to the States, because now we have a method that goes with our culture and religion, and it works very well. I could tell you a long story about that, but I know I'm short of time, so I better not. Oops, what did I do? Oh, there's something down here. There? What are those birds doing there? Birds and bees? Okay. So, at that time, we were using color stamps, so people wouldn't have to know how to read or write. But then very quickly we realized, the missionaries that I worked with told me, don't use the color green for infertility, because in Australia they were using the color green for the traffic lights. Green means go. And I said, so we changed it to another color. But in the meantime, when Billings came to Guatemala, and I said, throw away your thermometer, Dr. Billings, throw away your rhythm calculators, you don't need it. Look, people are following this perfectly well. So that's what made Billings change, and he said, this is what's going to make the method universal. Many people don't like to change, particularly doctors. Now you've heard about the napper technology, the Creighton model. It's very popular, it's a doctor. Oh, he must know better than me, who have nothing. Just a mother with children, housewife, that. But they made it so complicated. They're still using my old chart. And it looks like hieroglyphics. Women have to measure the secretion and blah, blah, blah. You know, the Billings get 99%, Creighton gets 99%, and we simplify the simple method, because I'm always thinking of the poor. Many may read and write, but not very well, or none at all. So how do they, God did not intend that only those who are very smart or intelligent or have gone to high school and all that can follow in natural family planning. But, with this simple method, anybody can learn it. And you would be amazed that they're using the same little stamps here in this area, and New York and Paris and all that, because it's simple. And we like things that are simple. If we make them complicated, people will not follow them. They will drop out. And then they will go to artificial methods. So to keep things simple is not easy. It's hard. It's much harder to make things simple. And it's easy to keep things complicated. All right? So what do? We took photographs of the secretion. So women have 15 photographs to choose from what they saw. And that way, it doesn't matter when people say, oh, I cannot follow natural family planning, it's too complicated, and have irregular cycles. Don't worry. This method works with regular or irregular cycles. If you have short cycles, like you see here, the signs of fertility that God puts in our body are going to appear early. If you have a long cycle like this one, you're going to have a lot of dry days. You notice that we change the color from green to brown, so that people will know that if you're dry, like a potted plant, or like the soil outside when it doesn't rain, like in California, where they have a drought forever, then they know what dryness is. And when the secretion begins, then they just choose whatever photograph they see in their chart. And what makes a cycle be short is still a mystery. The doctors don't know what makes it short. Why the messages from the brain start early? Who knows? Why they start late, we have a better idea. It could be that you may be sick, or you may be on antibiotics, or the mother-in-law came to visit you, and you got nervous. Things like that, stress, could delay the return of fertility. That's all we know. But the signs of fertility that God placed on our bodies when we're fertile are there. And the only other thing that we know pretty well is that from the peak of fertility to the next menstruation, it's always approximately 2 weeks. There could be a variation between 11 and 16 days, but it's usually approximately 2 weeks. And we women become very good at knowing our own cycle. And we're able to know when our period is most likely to come. We are so good at this that we know when we got pregnant, and we know exactly when the baby is to be born, and we are the ones who tell the doctor, who starts asking, what is the date of your last period? No, doctor. I know exactly when we conceived this child. And then just count your 283 or whatever number of days, and that's when the baby's going to be born. And anyway, it's becoming more of a revelation for women to know now they're really in control of their fertility, of their knowledge, but both husband and wife know what is happening in their bodies. The husband is fertile all the time, but the woman is really only fertile for about 100 hours. Hard to believe for those who have 10 and 12 children, who think the husband just has to look at me and I get pregnant. But it's not that easy. So we teach very simply the anatomy and physiology. You don't want to make things complicated. I mean, these are terrible names that you have to give to everything. The endometrium, we just talk about the food for the baby for the next 9 months. That's better. And then we talk about the entrance with the vagina, where the cervix, which is the one that's producing the nourishment for the sperm. Without that secretion, the husband's sperms cannot live. They die within minutes. If you're dry, the husband's sperm will die. If you're wet, a baby you may get. And that's all you have to remember. It seems difficult, but that's exactly what it is. Okay? So we talk about the brain, we do tell them how little science knows about the brain. They pretend to know a lot, but when you ask the real, honest physicians, like Jérôme Lejeune, who discovered Down syndrome, he's the one who would tell you, I said, doctor, how much do they know about the brain? 4, 6%, maybe. The more we learn, the more we realize how little we know. That's what he used to say. So, a little baby girl is born with the number of eggs she's going to have for the rest of her reproductive life. So that's why it's so important to protect them. So what we spend most of our time is teaching and training couples so that they train each other in their own areas. So anybody wanting to learn, to be trained in natural family planning, just let us know. And I'll show you how simply we make things so that people don't get confused, because it's easy to confuse people. So we have a couple that has children and wants to space their children, and then we teach them to space their children if that's what they want. Or a couple who is having trouble conceiving. Oh, you're going to hear a lot of interesting stuff about it. Now, there are 4 basic elements necessary for conception: God's will, egg, sperm, and fertile mucus. Those are essential. God has to be involved in this. And we always tell people to pray, because if it's God's will, you will become pregnant. If it's not God's will, you will not become pregnant. And the same thing, how do you teach it in a simple way so that everybody can learn it? Well, I've learned this from a priest who was a missionary in El Salvador, because we used to steal each other's materials all the time. Whoever had it better, we used to just take it over. So he had a great idea. He used to live out in the countryside in El Salvador. He was a doctor. He's an American from Cleveland. And there were 2 priests. One was a very good speaker, and the other one was a doctor. So the doctor would let the good speaker speak, and the doctor would be the one teaching the speaker. And he said, just like Mother Nature, if you have a beautiful earth like this where it's raining, the sun, and you have the river, and if you plant a seed in this ground, will it grow? Yes or no? Of course. And since I lived in the desert, I loved using this one, because I said, if you plant a seed in this environment, will it grow? Not unless it rains. I remember once a year it rained in Arabia, and then the whole desert turned green. All those seeds were dormant there. But usually, if you're dry, the sperm will die. If you're wet, a baby you may get. And that's all they had to remember. And just like Mother Nature is Mother Woman. She has her, you would not be planting seeds in Oregon in December or January, because it's too cold. I guess it's too cold here too. But you have to wait till the spring. Like now that it's getting warmer, then you start planting the seeds. Well, just like Mother Nature is Mother Woman. She has to wait for her rains for the husband and wife to have a baby. And I always say husband and wife, not partner or boyfriend, whatever they call it now. And this is how we do the color stamps. Okay, so red during the days of menstrual bleeding. If you're dry, you put a brown stamp. And then the moment the secretion begins, you put a white stamp with an imprint of a baby to know that from here on, you could have a baby if you have marital embrace during those days. And then there is more to teaching this. And the peak of fertility is the last day when the secretion was clear, elastic, like egg white. Then it changes, because when the progesterone levels begin to rise, the secretion changes from elastic, clear, like egg white, to sticky and non-elastic. So this is what the method is based on, teaching women to recognize their signs of fertility. Of course, this is from a very healthy woman, young, healthy woman. Poor people, because nutrition and fertility go together, they may not have that many days. They have less days of fertility. But you could have not very well-fed women, even in a wealthy country. And you have anorexia, and you have all these problems. But this is basically what the method is based on. You see how it starts sticky, ends sticky. And these are the 100 hours of major fertility for the woman. That's the only time the husband's sperm can live in her body. It's that simple. Okay, here you have just a typical cycle of a woman. Her period, you have the heart and the moon, because there are certain rules for you to follow while you're learning the method. Marital embrace every other evening, so that you do not confuse the beginning of the fertile phase with the seminal fluid when you're learning the method. And then if they're postponing pregnancy here, after the 4th day, after the peak, 1, 2, 3, the 4th day, they can have marital embrace anytime, day or night, till the next menstruation. Because ovulation, 70% of the time occur between the peak and day 1. You can have ovulation on day 1 or day 2, 5% only. And the egg, the female egg, only lives not more than 24 hours. This is why from the 4th day to the next menstruation, it's impossible to become pregnant. And these are the examples I just gave you of a short or long cycle, which makes no difference. And this is to show to those who are doctors in this group that the doctor who performed 750,000 hormonal correlations. This is Professor Brown, who is an OBGYN and endocrinologist as well. Very famous throughout the world. When he went with me to China one time, the Chinese people knew all about him. He's very famous. And he confirmed that the women's observation coincide perfectly with the hormones from the brain, from the pituitary gland, and the hormones of the ovaries. So it has no method in the world has had as much scientific support and verification. We have statistical studies from all over the world, from starting with Australia, or United States, Korea, Philippines, India, El Salvador, New Zealand, Ireland, India, Indonesia, Italy, People's Republic of China. They did their own study. We've been going there 13 times at the invitation of the Chinese government, who is now offering it as a method, as one option of methods of birth control. And Mother Teresa did her own study amongst the poorest of the poor in Calcutta with a 99% success rate, and it was published in the British Medical Journal. Took 3 years to get it published in the British Medical Journal. That's how biased they are. So the method is 98, 99%. And it's extremely successful in achieving pregnancy. Now, Of course, all you do is use the most fertile days to conceive, and usually a couple of normal fertility will have no problem conceiving in the first, second, or third cycle at the most. But there's always, people who have trouble conceiving. As you can see, the chromosomes that determine the sex of the human person, it is the ovum of the woman is usually X chromosomes, and the husband provides the X and the Y sperm. So X with X, the mother is going to have a baby girl. Y and X is going to be a boy. And funnily enough, this is something that attracts a lot of couples who may have 4 boys and they want a girl, or 5 girls and they want a boy, to help them have a better chance. But studies have been done in Nigeria, in India, particularly missionaries, because many times the Muslims would abandon the wife because she couldn't produce the boy, forgetting that he is the one that is producing the girl or the boy. And so the missionaries started teaching them when there's a better chance for a girl and a boy, and they got like a 98, 99% effectiveness. We did a study in Guatemala on this. So the interesting part is that the female sperms live 2 to 3 days. The male sperms swim faster, but after 24 hours they collapse, they die. Which means that we're the strongest sex. Okay? That's why they say women never die. So, we did a study on achieving pregnancy in Guatemala, where I have teachers that we pay in the countryside and in the city, in the poor hospitals. We decided to do a study, and to enter the study, they had to have been trying at least for 1 year to become pregnant. And at the end of 3.5 years, I reported the study. I reported it in the Vatican, and I reported it in 2 medical conferences, because our results were just much too good to be believed. And one of them, we had 54 couples. It's a small study, but it's very, very interesting. Even I couldn't believe it. We managed to get a 90.7% success rate in helping couples. We had couples that had 1 to 12 years that they couldn't become pregnant. And they had the same problems that anybody has, in any of the studies that I have seen. As a matter of fact, when I presented it to over 100 physicians, they were primarily NAPRO technology physicians. They couldn't believe it when I finished talking. There was dead silence. Some doctors would say, maybe Guatemalan women are different. And I said, well, I'm afraid that we are not. We have the same problems that you have here, and using the same methods that you have here, and eating the same foods pretty much. They already have junk food there too. So, and pardon? Yes, okay, they're telling me to hurry up and finish. Anyway, comparing it to other studies, the only difference of what we did in helping those women was nutrition, good nutrition, and vitamins. That was it. And because they were poor, we couldn't ask them to take 400 vitamin E and so much of B complex and so much separate. No, we just the one a day, because that's all they could afford to buy. And it worked. This is the comparison of in vitro. They claim 33% success rate. Billings in Australia did a study, and they had 65% success. The NAPRO technology, NAPRO technology, they have 66%. Well, they claim between 50 and 80%, or maybe more. But I just averaged it to 66, and ours was 90.7, which is ridiculously high. The only difference, because These two methods are the same, Billings and Creighton. And the only difference was that nutrition and vitamins. That's it. And, you know, I always thought God would not be so unfair that unless you had $12, $14, $15,000 to pay to those physicians that are experts in infertility, the poor could not do it. You know, we don't charge anything. And we also did a study on divorce and confirmed that couples that practice natural family planning only had a 3% divorce rate. And the idea that 50% of couples divorce is a lie. It's almost impossible to do a divorce rate study, because where do you start? 1960s, 1950s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. It's about 23 to 30% divorce rate. It's not 50%. That's a lie. And I better hurry up and finish. We also did a study, because I think the only answer is not just teaching a technique of natural family planning, but you have to teach a whole program of the family. And in the years of President Reagan, we received a $1.3 million grant, which the ACLU and Planned Parenthood tried to stop by suing us, suing the government, really, to stop our program. But luckily, because the legal system in the United States is so slow, we were able to finish our 3-year project and prove to the government that by going through the parents, don't go to the schools, go to the parents, because parents are the prime educators of their children in everything, including matters of human sexuality. But with the excuse that we were going to help them with their children, we were really educating the parents. And we lowered teen pregnancies to 1/20th of the national average. Yeah, of course the government would never have anything more to do with us because we were trouble. And the other thing is, teach your children to take the pledge that true love waits for the sacred sacrament of marriage. Prepare them to take that pledge, to remain virgins until marriage. And if they're no longer virgins, then they can go for what they call the secondary virginity, and invite the parents and the teenagers to take the pledge after Mass, before the crucifix. And this is done in Guatemala, but we've done it in Poland, we've done it in US, we've done it in Mexico. And this is a Congress for Catholic Youth Congress in Guatemala in 2010, and there was another one in 2012. And there were 8,000 young people, and they all took the pledge there. Anyway, to finish, Mother Teresa has said that God does not expect us to be successful, but to remain faithful. And I will finish with her prayer. The fruit of silence is prayer. The fruit of prayer is faith. The fruit of faith is love. The fruit of love is service. The fruit of service is peace. Thank you very much.